I am 82 years old, and yesterday morning, exactly at 10:14 a.m., I sat across from my bewildered wealth manager, picked up a heavy black pen, and calmly liquidated the last one. $2 million of my family's trust. I transferred every single red cent to an untouchable, private account that my children will never ever find. Go ahead. Call me a monster. Call me a bitter, spiteful old fool. Society tells us that a parent's love must be an endless, unconditional fountain of martyrdom. They tell us that no matter how much your adult children neglect you, disrespect you, or treat you like an expiring atom, you are supposed to smile, endure the agonizing silence, and leave them a massive estate when you finally have the decency to drop dead. Well, I decided to rewrite the ending of my own movie. My children, Michael and Sarah, think they have it all figured out. They think they are the masters of the long game. They picture themselves popping champagne at the reading of my will, inheriting the four-bedroom colonial house, the pristine stock portfolio, and the generations of hard work I bled for. They don't know that the house they grew up in is now just the hollow shell of equity, heavily reverse, mortgaged to fund my new life. They don't know that the antique silver they've been passive-aggressively calling dibs on was quietly sold to a private collector last Tuesday. And they certainly don't know about Box 42. Deep in the underground vault of the Chase Bank downtown, resting coldly on a metal shelf, sits a small, faded velvet box from 1984. I placed it there myself, paying the safe deposit box, rental fee, 20 years in advance. It is the only thing, the absolute only thing, Michael and Sarah will inherit from me when my lungs finally draw their last breath. It is my final, undeniable statement to them. But we will get to what is inside that velvet box later. You aren't ready for that truth yet. Hell, for a long time, neither was I. You see, aging in America is a peculiar, invisible kind of punishment. We spend 4 decades sacrificing our youth, our sleep, and our peace of mind to build an empire of entitlement for our kids. We wear the same winter coat for 12 years so they can go to their fancy out-of-state colleges without drowning in student loans. We swallow our own dreams so they can choke on their privileges. And how do they repay us when our hair turns gray and our steps slow down? With a hurried 5-minute phone call on a Sunday afternoon, usually while they are multitasking in the Starbucks drive-thru. They speak to us not as people, but as obligations. We become curators of a museum they only intend to visit when it's time to loot the gift shop. I used to be one of those pathetic, hopeful fools who defended them. I really was. I used to sit in my quiet living room, staring at the dust motes dancing in the sunlight, making endless excuses for their absence. Michael is just so busy with his law firm, I would whisper to myself. Sarah is just overwhelmed with her yoga retreats and her own kids. I justified their suffocating silence because the alternative, admitting that I had raised 2 beautifully educated, deeply narcissistic strangers, was simply too agonizing to bear. I wanted to believe they still loved me. I wanted to believe my sacrifices meant something. But that pathetic illusion shattered completely. It didn't happen gradually. It happened in one single brutal moment. A moment involving a midnight thirst, a dark hallway, and a hushed, calculating conversation I was never ever supposed to hear. Before I tell you exactly what my own flesh and blood said in the dark that night, you have to understand the foundation of the house they were so eagerly planning to tear down. You have to understand how the monster of entitlement is created. It isn't born overnight. No, it is built brick by brick, sacrifice by parents who love too blindly. My late husband, Richard, and I bought this 4-bedroom colonial in 1976. The interest rates were agonizing, but we were fueled by that intoxicating mid-century American dream. We believed, with a foolish, religious fervor, that if we just worked ourselves to the bone, our children would stand on our shoulders and reach the stars, and work we did. I want you to think about the things you gave up for your children. Really think about it. For 40 years, I was a ghost in my own life. Richard worked 60-hour weeks at the firm, grinding his blood pressure into a dangerous red zone, while I managed the house, the accounts, and a part-time accounting job just to keep the margins wide. We never took that dream anniversary trip to Florence. The travel brochures sat in my top drawer until they turned yellow and brittle. Instead, that money went straight into a voracious 519 college fund. I wore the same olive green London fog trench coat for 15 brutal East Coast winters. The cuffs were frayed down to the bare threads, but Sarah simply had to have competitive equestrian lessons to round out her college applications. And Michael needed the elite $2,000 SAT tutor to ensure his acceptance into Georgetown. We thought we were being exceptional parents. That was the great delusion of our generation, wasn't it? We were raised to respect our elders, to fear God, and to make our own way. But when we had kids, the pendulum swung too far. We wanted to give them the soft, frictionless life we never had. We shielded them from struggle. We absorbed every financial shock so they wouldn't feel the tremors. But here is the brutal psychological truth they don't tell you in those parenting seminars. When you constantly put your children's desires above your own basic needs, you aren't teaching them gratitude. You are teaching them that you do not matter. You teach them that your purpose is purely transactional. We didn't raise empathetic human beings. We raised aristocrats, and aristocrats do not thank the servants. Michael got his law degree. Sarah got her master's and married an investment banker. They stepped into their shiny six-figure lives, driving their leased Audis, living in their gated communities. And almost immediately, Richard and I were downgraded from parents to background noise. We became the quaint, slightly embarrassing old folks they visited out of sheer grinding obligation. The calls became shorter. The excuses became longer. "We're just so swamped this weekend, Mom. The kids have soccer tournaments, Dad. We can't make it." When Richard died of a massive coronary 5 years ago, standing right there in the kitchen where we had packed thousands of school lunches, the dynamic shifted permanently. I wasn't a grieving widow to them, not really. I became a liability, a decaying piece of infrastructure holding up their eventual payout. The silence in this big, empty house became a physical weight. You sit there, surrounded by the expensive mahogany furniture you meticulously polished for them to inherit, and a cold realization washes over you. You realize you have entered a very specific, very terrifying phase of life. A phase where the people you gave your youth to are suddenly, quietly tapping their watches. Welcome to the waiting room of death. That's what I call it now. It isn't a sterile hospital corridor smelling of bleach, latex, and regret. No, it's your own living room. It is the meticulously vacuumed rug, the ticking grandfather clock in the hallway, and the crushing absolute silence that swallows you whole when you live alone in a house built for four. After Richard's funeral, the shift in Michael and Sarah was subtle at first. A missed visit here, a forgotten birthday there, but as the months bled into years, their gaze fundamentally changed. When they looked at me, they were no longer looking at the woman who rocked them to sleep through childhood fevers. I could see the cold, calculating arithmetic behind their eyes. They were looking at an estate. They were looking at a walking, talking portfolio that was, frankly, taking a little too long to mature. Have you ever noticed the specific tone your adult children use when they call you? It's a master class in patronizing impatience, the obligatory Sunday afternoon phone call. Always exactly 12 minutes long, timed perfectly for their commute or while they are loading their stainless steel dishwashers. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. How are you?" But they don't really want to know how you are. If you mention your arthritis, or the profound loneliness that grips your chest like a vice at 4,000 am, you can practically hear them rolling their eyes. You hear the furious, distracted typing of a laptop keyboard in the background. You realize, with a sickening drop in your stomach, that you are merely an item on a to-do list, wedged right between pick up dry cleaning and email the accountant. Instead, the conversations always, inevitably, drift toward the tangible, toward the assets. "Mom, the gutters on the house are looking a bit old. You're keeping up with the maintenance, right? We wouldn't want the property value to drop." "Mom, have you thought about downsizing? That big house is just too much for you to manage. You might fall. We could help you sell it." Sell it. Liquidate the asset. Put the cash in a neat, easily transferable trust. They dressed it up in the suffocating language of concern for my safety. But I knew exactly what it was. It was asset protection. Their assets, my money was no longer mine in their minds. It was their deferred inheritance, and I was merely the incompetent, decaying security guard hired to watch over it until I died. It is a profound psychological violence to realize you have become a breathing atom. Society tells us we are supposed to just take it. We are told to shrink ourselves, to have no boundaries, to accept whatever meager crumbs of attention our narcissistic children throw at us, because family is family. I should have set an ironclad boundary then. I should have told them to go to hell, called a realtor, and moved to the coast. I should have booked a first-class ticket to anywhere and left them nothing but that faded velvet box in the Chase vault. But I didn't, because the maternal instinct is a vicious, pathetic liar. Despite the coldness, despite the blatant financial vultures circling my roof, I still wanted my family. I still craved that picture. Perfect delusion. I desperately wanted to believe that underneath the greed, my children still loved me. And then a miracle happened, or at least the cruelest imitation of one. It was early November. The leaves outside my window were turning a brittle, dying brown. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening, which was entirely unprecedented. It was Sarah. Her voice was uncharacteristically warm, lacking that usual hurried, irritated edge. "Mom," she said softly, sounding exactly like the little girl I used to know. "Michael and I were talking, and we feel terrible that you've been alone so much. We want to bring the kids and come stay with you for the entire week of Thanksgiving. All of us, under one roof. We want to take care of you, Mom." I sat in my armchair, the phone trembling against my ear, hot tears pooling in my wrinkled eyes. I thought my prayers had been answered. I thought the ice had finally thawed, and my family was coming back to me. For the first time in 5 years, the heavy oak front door of my colonial flew open, and my house breathed. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and suddenly, the driveway was packed with gleaming subs. The agonizing, ticking silence of the grandfather clock was instantly drowned out by the chaotic, beautiful symphony of family. My grandchildren, loud, messy, and vibrant, were running through the halls, leaving fingerprints on the pristine glass of the French doors. And I didn't care. God, I didn't care at all. I would have let them paint the walls with mud just to keep the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears. Then came Michael and Sarah. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought they were replaced by alien duplicates. The transformation was absolute. Michael walked in, kissed me on the cheek, and immediately took off his expensive cashmere coat. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look at his watch. Instead, he walked straight to the hall closet, pulled out Richard's old rusted toolbox, and smiled. "I noticed the handrail on the porch was a little loose when we pulled up, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with honeyed concern. "Let me tighten that up for you. We can't have you taking a fall." Sarah was a whirlwind of maternal energy. She brought bags of expensive groceries from Whole Foods, physically blocking me from entering my own kitchen. "Sit down, Mom," she scolded playfully, pouring me a glass of my favorite Pinot Noir. "You have cooked 40 Thanksgivings for this family. You are off duty. It is our turn to serve you." I sat in my wingback chair by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames practically melting the ice that had built up around my heart for half a decade. I watched my son fix the house. I watched my daughter chop vegetables. I watched my grandchildren play on the rug. We are starving animals, we old folks. We are so utterly desperate for the scraps of affection we once had in abundance that we will happily eat a poisoned apple if it is handed to us with a smile. And I ate it. I ate every single bite. Over the next 3 days, they wrapped me in a cocoon of false security. We looked through old photo albums. We laughed about Richard's terrible attempts at building a backyard deck in the 80s. During Thanksgiving dinner, Michael stood up, raised his crystal wine glass, and gave a toast that brought hot, stinging tears to my eyes. "To Mom," he said, looking right at me with what I swore was pure, unadulterated love. "The glue of this family, the strongest woman I know. We don't say it enough, but we love you, and we are so grateful for everything you've given us." I wept. I sat at the head of the table and wept like a child. In my mind, I viciously berated myself. You bitter, cynical old woman, I thought. How could you ever doubt them? How could you think they only cared about the money? They are busy, yes, but they are good kids. They came back. The family is whole again. I forgave them for every unanswered text. I forgave them for the lonely Christmases. The maternal instinct overrode every logical alarm bell in my brain, completely blinding me to the reality of the situation. I went to bed on Thanksgiving night, feeling a profound heavenly peace. The house was quiet, but it was a warm, satiated quiet. It was 1:15 a.m. when I woke up. My throat was parched from the wine and the salty turkey gravy. I slipped out of bed, sliding my feet into my worn wool slippers. The floorboards in this old house have a specific language. After 40 years, I know exactly which ones creak and which ones stay silent. I walked like a ghost down the carpeted hallway, not wanting to wake the grandchildren, descending the stairs toward the kitchen for a glass of ice water. As I reached the bottom step, I paused. There was a sliver of pale yellow light spilling onto the hardwood floor from the back patio. The sliding glass door was cracked open, just an inch. The freezing November wind was seeping in, carrying with it the hushed, urgent voices of my two children. It wasn't the warm, nostalgic voices from the dinner table. The tone had completely shifted. It was cold. It was calculating. They sounded exactly like two corporate raiders discussing a hostile takeover. I held my breath, pressing my back flat against the cold plaster of the hallway wall, and listened to the words that would shatter my reality forever. The cold, biting draft from the cracked patio door wrapped around my frail ankles like an icy hand. I pressed my spine flat against the hallway wallpaper, the floral pattern pressing into my back, and held my breath. My heart, which just hours ago had been overflowing with maternal warmth, suddenly seized in my chest. Outside, in the freezing dark, the glowing ember of Michael's cigar illuminated the sharp, calculating lines of his face. Sarah stood next to him, her arms tightly crossed over her expensive cashmere sweater. They weren't reminiscing about childhood memories. They weren't talking about how nice the dinner was. The market in this zip code is absolutely peaking right now, Sarah. Michael's voice drifted through the crack, low and strictly business. If we wait another 3 to 5 years for her to, who knows what this place will appraise for. The roof is going to need replacing soon. We need to get her out while it's still a seller's market. I stopped breathing. The darkness around me seemed to spin, pulling the oxygen from my lungs. Sarah took a sip from her wine glass, the same wine she had poured for me with a loving smile. I know, Mike, but we can't just force an eviction. We have to frame it as a care decision. We have to make her think it's her idea because she's getting too fragile. I actually toured Oakwood Manor last week on my lunch break. Oakwood, Michael scoffed. Isn't that place practically a warehouse? It's $4,000 a month cheaper than the assisted living facility down the street. Sarah snapped back, her voice laced with an ugly, greedy pragmatism. And it accepts Medicaid once her personal funds dip below the threshold. Listen to me. If she stays here and suddenly needs round-the-clock in-home nursing, or if she breaks a hip and goes to a premium facility, the trust will bleed out 15 grand a month. It will wipe out the liquid assets in 3 years. We have to protect the estate. Protect the estate, not protect me. Protect the money. The realization hit me with the physical force of a sledgehammer. Every single piece of the last 3 days suddenly snapped into terrifying, agonizing focus. The Thanksgiving miracle was a lie. It was a charade. It was a meticulously planned, hostile home inspection, disguised as a family reunion. Michael wasn't fixing the loose handrail on the porch to keep me from falling. He was doing minor repairs to increase the curb appeal for a future open house. Sarah wasn't aggressively taking over the kitchen to pamper her tired old mother. She was taking inventory of the updated appliances. That beautiful tear-jerking toast at dinner. It was a psychological sedative designed to soften me up, to make me compliant, pliable, and perfectly willing to sign over my power of attorney when they finally sprang their little care plan on me. I was nothing but a dying squatter in their future real estate listing. Most mothers, I suppose, would have collapsed right there on the hardwood floor. They would have burst into tears, pushed open the glass door, and confronted their children. They would have screamed, begged for an explanation, and demanded the love they were owed, but I didn't shed a single tear. The reservoir of grief I had carried for them had been completely permanently drained. Something else happened instead. In the suffocating darkness of that hallway, the pathetic, hopeful, people-pleasing mother inside me died, and in her place, a cold, terrifying clarity took root. The kind of clarity that only comes when you realize you have absolutely nothing left to lose. I didn't make a sound. I silently stepped backward, careful not to let the floorboards creak, and retreated to the shadows of the staircase. I climbed back up to my bedroom, slid into the cold sheets, and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. They wanted to protect the estate. They wanted to play a ruthless game of financial chess with my life. Fine, but what they didn't realize was that I held all the pieces, I owned the board, and by the time the sun rose, I had already decided exactly how I was going to burn it all down. The next morning, the sun rose over the frost-covered lawn exactly as it had for 40 years. I walked into the kitchen, tied my floral apron around my waist, and began making blueberry pancakes. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream or cry or smash the china. You see, confrontation requires a fundamental belief that the other person actually cares about your feelings. Confrontation requires hope, and my hope had been completely, surgically removed in the dark hallway the night before, when Michael and Sarah finally stumbled downstairs, blinking away their expensive wine hangovers. I greeted them with a smile so warm, so perfectly maternal, that it frankly terrified me. I played the part of the oblivious, fragile old mother flawlessly. I poured their coffee. I kissed my grandchildren's sticky foreheads. I listened to Sarah complain about the traffic they would face on the drive back to the city. And I watched them pack their subs with a cold, detached fascination. As they were leaving, Sarah hugged me tightly, her designer perfume masking the scent of her betrayal. "Mom," she whispered, her voice dripping with that manufactured concern, "we really need to have a serious talk soon about your living situation, just to make sure you're safe and comfortable as you get older. We want what's best for you." I patted her cashmere, covered back. "Oh, don't you worry about me, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady and light. "I already have a plan. Everything is going to be taken care of." Michael kissed my cheek. "Love you, Mom. We'll call you this week." "Drive safe," I replied. I stood on the porch, wrapped in my frayed cardigan, and waved as their taillights disappeared down the long oak-lined driveway. I stood there until the sound of their engines faded into the crisp November wind, and the very second their cars were out of sight, the sweet, grandmotherly smile slid off my face like a cheap theater mask. I walked back inside, locked the heavy deadbolt, and walked straight to my rotary phone in the study. Society, especially in America, pushes a very toxic narrative about family. Psychologists and Sunday school teachers will tell you that you must always forgive your family. They preach that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But they are wrong. There's a massive psychological chasm between forgiveness and emotional suicide. Forgiving someone who has genuinely repented is healing. But forgiving someone who is actively, continuously exploiting you, that isn't grace. That is self-destruction, and I absolutely refuse to be an accomplice in my own destruction any longer. I picked up the receiver. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My first call was to Howard, my late husband's estate attorney. "Howard," I said, my voice possessing a sharp metallic edge I hadn't used in decades. "I need to see you tomorrow morning. First thing, we are completely restructuring the trust. I am revoking Michael and Sarah's medical and financial power of attorney, effective immediately. If I end up in a coma, I'd rather have a state-appointed stranger pull the plug than let my children near my life support." Howard stammered, clearly shocked, but he agreed. My second call was to Evelyn. Evelyn wasn't a friendly neighborhood realtor who baked cookies for open houses. Evelyn was a shark. She dealt in high-end, off-market, discreet cash sales for wealthy clients going through vicious divorces. "Evelyn, it's Margaret. I need to liquidate the Colonial. No Zillow listings, no for sale signs on the lawn. I want an all-cash buyer, and I want it closed in 30 days. Can you do it?" I can do it in 20, she replied smoothly. I hung up the phone. The house was dead quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel like a waiting room for death. It felt like the deep breath before a plunge. The liquidation had officially begun in the shadows, but selling the house was just the logistics. The real psychological shock came 3 days later, when the first wire transfer cleared, and I walked into a luxury travel agency to do something I hadn't done in 40 years. I walked into Destinations Unbound, a boutique luxury travel agency downtown. The agent, a young woman with a sleek silk scarf and a practiced smile, glanced at my frayed olive green London fog coat with thinly veiled condescension. She probably assumed I was looking for directions to the nearest pharmacy, or perhaps a discounted senior bus tour to Branson, Missouri. I sat down in the plush leather chair opposite her, reached into my worn handbag, and slid my newly minted heavy metal bank card onto the pristine glass of her desk. I want to go to Tuscany, I told her, my voice perfectly steady. First-class flights, the finest private villa you have available. A personal driver, and absolutely no budget. Her eyes nearly popped out of her perfectly manicured skull. 3 days later, I was sitting in seat 1 on an overnight flight to Florence, when the flight attendant handed me a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon before takeoff. My hand actually trembled. I stared at the rising bubbles and realized, with a sickening jolt of math, that this single glass of champagne cost more than the weekly grocery budget I used to strictly enforce to pay for Michael's sat tutor. For the first 48 hours in Italy, the phantom limb of mother's guilt ached terribly. It is a deeply ingrained sickness, this American martyr complex. As I sat in Michelin-starred restaurants, I found myself mentally converting the price of white truffles and aged Barolo wine into my grandchildren's future college tuition. I felt like a thief spending stolen money. But on the third morning, something fundamentally shifted. I was sitting on a sun-drenched stone terrace overlooking the rolling, misty green hills of the Val d'Orcia. The air smelled of cypress trees and warm earth. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in 4 decades, my lungs expanded completely. The suffocating weight of my children's expectations was gone. The guilt evaporated, instantly replaced by something sharp, intoxicating, and terrifyingly beautiful: oxygen. Pure, unadulterated oxygen. I realized then what a magnificent lie we are sold about generational wealth. We hoard our assets like dragons sleeping on gold, convincing ourselves it is a noble, final act of love. But wealth isn't love. Wealth is simply stored energy. It is the physical manifestation of your time, your sweat, and your youth. And I was finally, selfishly, using my own energy to fuel the last chapters of my own life, instead of leaving it behind as a battery for ungrateful parasites. Every euro I spent was a brick removed from the empire of entitlement I had built for them. Every extravagant dinner was $1 that wouldn't be waiting for them at the reading of my will. All they would get was the quiet, dusty velvet box, waiting patiently in the Chase bank vault. I spent 3 glorious weeks in Italy. I bought hand-stitched leather luggage. I wore silk scarves that cost more than my first car. I laughed with charming strangers in piazzas who didn't look at me like an expiring atom, but simply as a woman enjoying her afternoon. I was entirely reborn. But while I was sipping espresso in Rome, thousands of miles away across the Atlantic Ocean, Evelyn the shark was doing her job flawlessly. The 20-day, all-cash quiet escrow on my colonial house had officially closed. The ink was dry. The title was transferred. The heavy brass locks were being completely changed by the new owners. And as my return flight touched down on the tarmac at JFK, my cell phone finally reconnected to the network, and the screen instantly exploded with a barrage of terrified, frantic notifications. My cell phone vibrated so violently in my palm, I thought the lithium battery might genuinely explode. As the plane taxied toward the gate at JFK, the screen illuminated the dark cabin with a terrifying rapid-fire sequence of notifications. 47 missed calls, 112 text messages, 14 voicemails. They were all from Michael and Sarah. I sat back in my plush first-class seat, sipping the last of my sparkling water, and calmly tapped the voicemail icon. I pressed the phone to my ear and listened to the spectacular, chaotic unraveling of their entitlement. The first voicemail was from Michael, recorded at 2:15 p.m. the previous day. He was trying to sound worried, but the sharp edge of panic was already slicing through his baritone voice. Mom, pick up the phone. I drove by the house on my way to a client meeting just to check the gutters, and there is a commercial moving truck in the driveway. Mom, where are you? Call me the second you get this. The second voicemail, 3 hours later, the fake concern had completely evaporated. Ma, what the hell is going on? The men at the house are saying they bought the property. They showed me a deed. Are you in some kind of trouble? Did someone scam you? I am calling the police. Call me back right now. By the seventh voicemail, Sarah was on a conference call with him, her voice shrill and trembling with a specific kind of aristocratic terror, the terror of losing free money. Mom, this is insane. We are contacting Howard. We are going to get this reversed. You are clearly having some sort of cognitive episode. A cognitive episode. I smiled. A thin, icy smile in the dim light of the airplane cabin. There it was, the ultimate weapon of the adult child, facing a cut-off inheritance. Weaponizing your aging mother's mental health to seize control of her assets. I walked off the plane, collected my handcrafted Italian leather luggage, and stepped into the back of a sleek black town car I had hired for the drive into the city. I wasn't going back to the suburbs. I had leased a beautiful, sunlit penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, paid fully in cash for the next 3 years. As the car merged onto the expressway, I dialed Michael's number. He picked up on the half ring. Mom. Oh my God. Where are you? Are you safe? The police? Cancel the police, Michael, I said. My voice was eerily calm, smooth as glass. I am perfectly fine. I am in the back of a town car, returning from a 3-week vacation in Tuscany. The truffles were extraordinary, by the way. Dead silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing heavily. Sarah's voice echoed in the background. Is that her? Put her on speaker. Tuscany, Michael choked out, the word sounding foreign and offensive in his mouth. Mom, what did you do? Why are there strangers in the house? Our house. It is not your house, Michael, I corrected him, staring out the tinted window at the passing city skyline. It was my house. Richard and I paid the mortgage. And now it belongs to a lovely young couple from Connecticut. I sold it. You can't do that. Sarah screamed into the speakerphone, dropping every ounce of her polished yoga retreat zen. That house is part of the estate. That is our family home. You are out of your mind. We are calling a judge. We are getting a conservatorship, Mom. You are clearly not mentally fit to. Stop. I didn't raise my voice, but the absolute freezing authority in my tone cut through her hysterics like a scalpel. Listen to me very carefully, both of you, I said, leaning back into the leather seat. I am not confused. I am not having an episode. In fact, my mind has never been clearer. I heard you on Thanksgiving, Sarah, out on the patio. I heard you pricing out the cheapest Medicaid warehouses to dump me in so you could preserve the trust. A sickening, breathless gasp echoed through the phone. They were completely paralyzed. You thought I was deaf or just stupid, I continued, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You thought you could manage my death like a corporate merger. Well, the merger is canceled. I don't owe you my future. I don't owe you my suffering. And I certainly don't owe you a single red cent of my money. Mom, please, you misunderstood, Michael pleaded. But it was pathetic. The lie was dead. Do not contact Howard, I interrupted. He doesn't work for you. Do not try to find my new address. If you try to file for a conservatorship, my new legal team is prepared to drag your reputations through a public, agonizingly expensive court battle. Have a nice life. I hung up. I blocked their numbers, but I knew the war wasn't completely over. Narcissists do not simply walk away when their ATM is shut down. They would try to find a loophole. They would try to break my ironclad boundaries and prove I was insane. But I had spent the last month building an impenetrable legal fortress, and I was ready for them. The silence in my new penthouse overlooking Central Park was profoundly different from the silence in the old colonial. In the suburbs, the quiet was heavy, suffocating, and dripping with the agonizing anticipation of a phone ring that never came. Here, on the 32nd floor, looking down at the glittering canopy of the city, the silence was pristine. It was the silence of absolute, untouchable freedom. But freedom, especially from narcissistic family members, requires more than just a change of address. It requires a fortress. For the next 6 months, Michael and Sarah waged a desperate subterranean war against me. They couldn't find my physical location, thanks to a labyrinth of LSEs holding my lease and assets, but they tried to attack the one thing older Americans are most vulnerable to, my mental competency. They hired a vicious litigator to petition the courts for a conservatorship, claiming I was experiencing sudden onset dementia and was being financially exploited by unknown actors. It is the oldest, dirtiest trick in the book. When they can't control you with guilt, they try to control you with a medical diagnosis. But I was already 10 steps ahead of them. Do not wait for them to strike. You must build your legal fortress before the first shot is fired. The week before I flew to Tuscany, I didn't just meet with a real estate agent. I voluntarily paid out of pocket for a comprehensive 5-hour neuropsychiatric evaluation with one of the top geriatric psychiatrists in the state. I established a pristine, legally binding baseline of my total cognitive brilliance. Furthermore, I hired a new estate firm, a boutique group of absolute bulldogs who act as independent fiduciaries. I specifically instructed them to aggressively countersue for legal fees if my children ever attempted to challenge my competency. When my lawyers presented my preemptive medical records and the airtight, restructured trust documents to the judge, Michael and Sarah's petition wasn't just dismissed. It was laughed out of chambers. The ironclad boundary held. The Aten was permanently decommissioned. Finding peace when you are aging alone isn't about surrounding yourself with people. It is about actively removing the people who make you feel invisible. Yes, society will judge you. The ladies at the country club will whisper that you are a cold, unnatural mother. Let them whisper. They are likely going home to cry in their own empty living rooms, still desperately clinging to the false hope that their children will magically change. I stopped hoping, and in doing so, I started living. I am 82 years old now, and my life is entirely my own. I read thick biographies while drinking Darjeeling tea by the window. I attend afternoon symphonies. I do not have to endure patronizing Sunday phone calls, and I do not have to listen to greedy whispers in the dark. I have built a mental fortress so thick, so brilliantly impenetrable, that the ghosts of my past cannot even slide a piece of paper under the door. But I am also a realist. I am an old woman, and no amount of green juice or penthouse views can permanently stall the ticking clock of mortality. One day, hopefully soon, I will close my eyes in this beautiful apartment, and I will simply not wake up. And when that day comes, the intricate machinery of my final revenge will seamlessly engage. My lawyers will make one final, brief phone call to Michael and Sarah. They will be informed of my passing, and they will be instructed to travel to the Chase Bank downtown. They will be handed a single, silver key. They will walk down into the cold, sterile vault. Their hands will tremble with the pathetic, lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, I left them a secret fortune after all. They will slide the key into box 412, and they will finally open the velvet box from 1984. I can picture the scene perfectly. In my mind's eye, it plays out with the crisp, high-definition clarity of a cinematic masterpiece. It will be a rainy Tuesday, perhaps a few days after my deeply private, no-family-invited cremation. Michael and Sarah, dressed in their obligatory black cashmere, will walk into the marble-floored lobby of the Chase Bank downtown. The senior partner from my Bulldog law firm will be waiting for them. He won't offer his condolences. He will simply hand them a single silver key, point them toward the heavy steel doors of the vault, and walk away. The stale, climate-controlled air of the vault will hit them. Their hearts will inevitably be racing. Because despite the sold house, despite the severed ties, human greed is an unkillable parasite. Deep down, they will still believe that Mother, in her final dying breath, couldn't help but leave them a secret fortune, a hidden trust, a pile of bearer bonds. Michael will slide the key into box 4012. The lock will click. He will pull out the long metal drawer and set it on the viewing table. Inside, resting on the cold steel, will be the small, faded velvet box from 1984. It is the box that originally held the sapphire necklace Richard gave me for our 10th anniversary, a necklace I sold months ago in Florence to pay for a private yacht charter along the Amalfi Coast. Sarah's perfectly manicured hands will tremble as she reaches for it. She will pop the stiff hinge open. There will be no diamonds inside. There will be no stock certificates. Instead, resting on the yellowed satin lining are exactly 3 pieces of paper. Michael will unfold the first piece. It is a fully paid, itemized invoice from the most exclusive, astronomically expensive private nursing and end-of-life care agency in the state. The total amount at the bottom will perfectly match the final, drained balance of what used to be their $1 million inheritance. I made absolutely sure the check cleared before I closed my eyes. Sarah will unfold the second piece. It is a torn sheet of legal paper. Written on it, in my meticulous, sweeping cursive, is a verbatim transcript. The roof is going to need replacing soon. We need to get her out while it's still a seller's market. Oakwood is $4,000 a month cheaper. We have to protect the estate. Overheard on the back patio, 1:15 a.m., Thanksgiving night. I can only imagine the blood draining from their faces. The sickening, suffocating realization that for years they were utterly outsmarted by the old woman they thought was going deaf. And then their eyes will fall upon the final piece of paper, a small, heavy cardstock note resting at the very bottom of the velvet box. My final, undeniable statement from beyond the grave. It simply reads, "You spent your entire adult lives waiting for me to die so you could inherit my worth. But my worth was never yours to take. You wanted to protect the estate. Congratulations, the estate is protected. You inherit exactly what you gave me in my final years, absolutely nothing." They will leave that vault completely empty-handed, haunted by the brutal reality that their greed cost them everything. And as for you, the person listening to my story right now, I want you to look at your own life. Are you sitting in a quiet house, holding your breath for a phone call from a child who only views you as an obligation? Are you wearing a worn-out coat so you can leave a fortune to someone who wouldn't cross the street to check your blood pressure? Stop it. Stop it right now. You survived the struggles of your youth. You built your empire. It is time to cash out. Book the ticket, sell the house, spend the money. Because the brutal truth about aging in America is this: if you do not fiercely protect your own life, your children will gladly tear it apart to build theirs. Choose yourself. While you still can.